I'm always interested in like Chinese American, Asian American, mixed race stories, because that all relates to my own identity, I suppose.
Hey, y'all. Thanks for checking out the podcast. Today I'll be speaking with Katie Gee Salisbury, who wrote a book about Anna May Wong entitled Not Your China Doll. I didn't really know much about Anna May Wong except for what I'd seen in Ryan Murphy's Hollywood series for Netflix and when I watched the movie Babylon, but I was very intrigued. So join me as we learn about Hollywood's first Asian American movie star on Candid with Kimbra.
Hey, Katie, how are you?
I'm good. How are you?
Good, good. So I just want to start off by saying that I'm really enjoying your book. I'm actually not done with it yet, but but it's kind of long. I mean, it's not long, but it's long for me.
It's long. Yeah, I know it's a thick book. I realize that. It was definitely something that was discussed with my editor.
Yeah. So I became aware of you when I was at that CAM event, the Chinese American Museum, and I wanted to ask you about that. I mean, we have a couple things in common, but one thing is that we both volunteered at CAM, and I guess you volunteered. They said when they were interviewing you that it was, gosh, what, like 15 years ago or 10 years ago?
Actually, 20 years ago, it was my first college internship. I spent like a summer working there at the museum.
Okay, where are you from originally?
I'm from Arcadia. I'm from Southern California, so
Oh,
San Gabriel Valley. But I, after college, I moved to New York to work in book publishing. So I've basically been in New York for the last 16 years.
what, Brooklyn?
Yeah, I'm in Brooklyn now. Yeah.
Okay, okay. I have this fantasy about living in New York, so I want to ask you how is it Californian living in New York? What do you think?
It's like apples to oranges. It's totally different. You get a lot less space, a lot less nature, no
Mhm,
car.
mhm,
But that means, I mean, public transportation is here is very efficient.
mhm.
You're also always like in the center of everything, so it's really easy to meet people no matter where you live in the city. So there are a lot of like pluses and pros and cons. Also the weather, very different. I mean, I'm not, it's kind of nice to have four seasons and I don't mind the winter, but summer can be kind of brutal here because it's so humid. Whereas like, California, we have that really nice dry heat. So
Right.
I definitely miss that.
Yeah, I'm one of those weird people that doesn't mind humidity. So it's like people always complain about, Florida, New York, and I'm like, I
Yeah.
don't mind.
And you might like it a lot.
I know. I'm just the only thing I was telling a friend of mine, Lee, that I'm not used to the public transportation, and I know that's the great thing about New York is I'm not used to the cramming next to the body.
Yes.
You know, I'm
Yeah.
used to getting in the car, and I look nice when I get out of the car.
Exactly. Yeah, that's the big thing is like you can get ready at home and then on your way to the subway or in the subway, you're just like totally like everything is ruined.
I know it's like my hair, my skin, everything. But yeah, well, that's great. So I was reading a little bit about you on your bio, and so your mom is Chinese, right?
My mom's Chinese American.
Yeah, that's my mom is from Taiwan, so she was Taiwanese American, I guess you'd call it. But so she was fifth generation, right? Your
From
mom?
I'm fifth generation.
Oh, you're
So
so
yeah,
she's fourth.
yeah. So on in her family, so on her father's side, it was her grandfather who first came over, and then on her mother's side, it was actually her great grandfather, which is how we get to me being fifth generation. But yeah, so our families have been here a long time, although my mom and her family, at least in her immediate family, was the first to be born in the US.
And that's she's from her family's from China originally.
Yeah, southern China.
Okay, interesting. So were you brought up speaking Cantonese, or was that in your house? No, probably not, right? Because if she'd been here for so long.
Yeah, my mom doesn't speak Chinese really. I mean, so my grandparents are from like Toisan, which is a kind of a rural area that a lot of
I know it
early,
is.
yeah, Chinese were from. And so they speak more of like a dialect of Cantonese. So my mom heard it and learned some of it growing up, but in general, and my mom was the oldest, so none of her siblings speak any Cantonese. but in general, during that time, like the 50s and 60s, people wanted to assimilate. So we really did not learn or keep the language or go to Chinese school or anything like that. So I have learned Mandarin separately as a second language in college. And then, so I speak Mandarin, and then I know a little bit of Cantonese because I've taken a conversational class, but I really don't know much.
You're like me because my mom didn't really speak Chinese at home, but her family did when they'd come visit, you know. So I picked up a lot of stuff and I would spend summers in Taiwan. So, but then I learned it on my own in college because my mom was very critical. You know what I mean? Like every time I would try to say, she, no, it's this way, right? And I'd be like, Mom. You know, I mean, I think that's like old school Chinese, right? To be so critical about how you
Sure,
say.
yeah.
So, and it was always hard to find good Chinese teachers, you know, but I was always the best in the class because I was the only one of Chinese descent. So everybody else, it's really hard for Americans to speak, learn how to speak, you know, have no Asian in them or Chinese in them. I
Yeah.
had I had a friend who was taking Mandarin and then he ended up switching over to Japanese because he was like, it's easier.
That is true. Japanese is easier. I mean, at least like an alphabet and
Yeah.
reading is a lot easier because Chinese, I mean, I'm not literate. It's so difficult to read.
And I think the pronunciation is easier in Japanese too because there's not the different tones. So it's just
Yeah.
very, you know, it's kind of more what it you think it is. It's that's how you say it. And it's, you know, Chinese is so like if you say it a little bit differently, no, that means that, you know?
Yeah, there's like so many layers to speaking Chinese properly. Yeah.
Right, right. So, well, that's cool. I wanted to ask you about that. And so, how did you got involved with CAM because of college? You saw that you could do like an internship there or something?
Yeah, I mean, I think I was just I don't know how I landed. I must have been looking at I'm always been interested in the arts, but also in history and culture. And so I guess I was looking for something that would have been like local in Los Angeles that I could do. And somehow that popped up. And, it was also an opportunity. I think college especially was a time for me to search and look into my own identity as a mixed race person. And because I had grown up in an Asian American community, and most people knew my family, so I didn't really have to explain myself, right? But when you go away to college and people don't necessarily see me as Asian or identify me that way, it was difficult. It was like this new thing where I felt questioned, and then also feeling like maybe in some ways like not authentic enough, right? Like, oh, I don't know anything about my own culture. And so like I wanted to delve, I was studying Mandarin. I wanted to delve more into my Chinese heritage. And so I guess that was like an opportunity that opened up. And it really was an incredible experience because it was basically like my education in Chinese American history, which you don't really get in high school or in college unless you're taking like a specific class on it. So
That's
um,
true. That's true. Like when the first time I went to CAM, I remember that's why I wanted to volunteer there because, but I was a little disappointed that it was so small. You know what I mean? But I feel like it should be bigger. You know, but I
yeah.
realized that it takes, you know, funding basically, and so that's one of the reasons why I wanted to talk about the Chinese American because I feel like there need.
Mhm.
A lot of people know about the Japanese museum or what's it called?
Yeah, the national, I think it's the museum Japanese American, it's like the National Museum of Japanese American or something like that, right? Or I don't remember the exact name or an acronym, but yeah, it's like a very,
It's pretty well known, don't you think?
yeah, it's a
For,
big
for
museum. It's like it's a very new and modern building, whereas the Chinese American Museum, the thing that's special about it is it's in the last existing building of the original
True.
Chinatown.
That's
And so
true.
that's also why it's a bit of a wonky space because it's been repurposed.
Well, I actually love it. I mean, when I was there for the opening of the Anna May Wong exhibit, I was like, "This is such a cool space." I love that inner brick area. You know, that used to be a hotel, I guess, where they
Yeah,
had
Pico House.
yeah, the Pico House. Sorry, yeah. And I was like, "This is a really it's a nice setting." I like. I was thinking it'd be nice to have a party in there, but the only thing is, you know, sometimes when you go outside, like in the evening, it's still a little bit, I feel like I'm not sure if there's going to be, you know, I'm a little had concern for my safety just a little bit, when I go outside. But the last couple times I felt okay about it. It's just the area still to me doesn't feel completely safe, but I know it's getting better, right?
Mhm. Mhm.
And I love that gazebo that's outside. I took pictures there,
Also, yeah.
and it's just a really great space. And I think the CAM is a real quality museum. Even though I said it's small, I feel like it's really quality. And
Mhm.
I was just trying to think of all. This is my personality. I'm like, how can I help? Like, what ways can we do to, like, how can we get more people? But I am trying to bring them more exposure, and I'm going to incorporate in this podcast some of the pictures of it and stuff too. So, you know,
Amazing.
yeah. So, getting back to your book, I want to know what was your first what was your first reason for wanting to even write a book about her? I mean, oh, I think I remember in your interview you said you saw some pictures of her somewhere, and they seemed so small that you were interested in who's this Anna May Wong? Am I saying that right?
Yeah. Well, so it actually has to do with the museum. So on that internship, that's when I first saw a photograph of her, and I didn't know who she was. And the photograph really spoke to me. And so, when I asked, like, who's the woman in this photo, and then it was explained to me, oh, her name was Anna May Wong, and she was this internationally famous Chinese American movie star from the 1920s and 30s. It was like a bomb dropped on me because I was like, wow, like how incredible that someone like that existed. And then the next feeling was like, well, how come no one ever told me about her? And I went home and asked my mom, like, do you know who this is? And she's like, yeah, I don't really know. Like, the name sounds familiar, but I don't know anything about her. And I kept asking people, and nobody knew who she was anymore. So I, on the one hand, just wanted to learn more about her because she seemed so fascinating, and her history in many ways dovetailed with my own family's history, being Cantonese from Toisan in southern China, growing up in Los Angeles, being kind of a very independent, modern thinking woman. But so there's all of that, but then, like, well, how come, why is it that we don't know who she is anymore? And so I felt this sense of injustice, like that such an important figure could be so thoroughly forgotten, that just seemed wrong to me. And I was like, well, I got to do something about this. Like, I'm going to learn about her, and then I'm going to do something about this. I'm going to share her story. So that was kind of the initial feeling that I had about her 20 years ago. And then I did a little bit of research on her in college, later in college when I was writing my thesis, but it ended up not being able to write about her in that setting. But she just stuck in my head. And then I moved to New York, worked in book publishing, was working on other people's books. I worked on a book about the making of Breakfast at Tiffany's called Fifth Avenue 5 a.m. by Sam Wasson, which is a fabulous book. And when I was working on that book, I was like, wow, this is a way that I could write about Anna May Wong because it's very narrative driven and done in a really kind of like delicious, fabulous way. And so that planted a seed in me, like maybe one day, when I can figure out how to do that. And so, so that was like 15 years of my life of, college, working in New York and publishing. And then the last 5 years is when I really started to seriously research and write the book. So yeah, it was a journey.
Yep. Like I'd actually never heard of her myself until recently with Ryan. Gosh, what's his name? Ryan.
Oh, Ryan Murphy's
Yeah,
series on
Ryan
Netflix.
Murphy. That he did that series that had a Anime Wong character, and then
Mhm.
Babylon there was a
Yes.
Wong character, but still I had never really heard of her myself, and I'm pretty well knowledgeable about old movies, old movie stars, so that's why it's so fascinating to me that this time now we're bringing her attention. For me, actually, my mom was really into Nancy Kwan. I don't know if you remember her at
Oh,
all.
yeah. Oh, of course.
And yeah, and she was so beautiful. I actually did some. I do have a little background in musical theater, and I did some things from Flower Drum Song and things like that. So to me, she was like the one that I always kind of admired and followed. And you know, she's Eurasian. Also, I always thought her story was very interesting too. But she had such a different history and uh, trajectory, right? But her history was so different because Anna May Wong came from So it was like a poor family, right? Her dad was a I
In
mean,
class. Yeah.
he's becoming middle class, but I'm so assuming when they first came over, he was probably struggling a little bit, or
Yeah,
no?
I mean, well, so her parents were both born in California, like during the kind of gold rush era. But yeah, I mean, so it was a difficult time to be Chinese in America, right? There's a lot of discrimination. But yeah, so I would say they were working class, but he did really well as a laundryman. I mean, he was ultimately running a laundry where he wasn't doing the work. He had all his hired hands.
Yeah, it was like fascinating for me to learn about that too because I studied a lot about Chinese American history, and I learned all about when they came over on the rail, to work on the railroad. And in the beginning, the Chinese were actually very they wanted them to come over, right?
Yes, they needed labor. Yeah.
And they looked at them like they're these exotic creatures, but they're working so hard, But
Mhm.
I believe how the prejudice became more prevalent was because of they were working harder and asking for less money, and that was always like the big thing, like they're taking our jobs and that kind of thing. So that's how I believe that a lot of that adverse situation starting to arrive. You know,
Yeah, yeah. I mean, basically, once the Transcontinental Railroad was completed, a lot more white Americans or white immigrants were able to come west, and
Mhm.
suddenly they were competing with Chinese people for jobs, and they didn't like it, right? So then you have like the Working Men's Party, and there's a whole movement basically to get rid of the Chinese. Now that like the primary purpose that they had been brought there was to build a railroad, that was done. They're like,
Right,
okay, let's get rid of them so we can like give jobs to white people, and that really was kind of the central tension. And then that's also why a lot of Chinese people went into the laundry business because there were fewer women on the West Coast and nobody wanted to do that work.
sure.
And it wasn't seen as taking jobs away from white men because that wasn't something they were going to do.
Yeah, and I think correct me if I'm wrong, but isn't that why the Chinese Exclusion Act happened? Because they figured if the women couldn't come over, then the men would eventually want to go back to China or wherever they were from, or something like that.
Well, so the Chinese Exclusion Act was passed 1882, and it was definitely lobbied for by, white workers. But before that, like 10 years, or I think it's 1875, so I guess 7 years prior to that, they had already passed the Page Act, which essentially banned Asian women from immigrating to the US. Functionally made it impossible for Asian men, especially Chinese men, to start families
Right,
without unless they had like interracial marriages, which some did, even though those were illegal. But yeah, so they like then the whole system was to earn money, send money home to China, and then eventually like go back and retire there.
right. I knew there was something in there about the women and wanting the men, not letting the men have Chinese women, or that they couldn't come over, so they eventually would probably want to go back home or something, or at least they
Right.
could have more families here anyway.
Yeah.
Uh, So yeah, so Anna May Wong, she had a whole different set of struggles, like we were saying about Nancy Kwan, and that was a whole different time period. Nancy Kwan was more in the '60s, I believe, right? '68 or mid '60s, I think.
Yeah.
And Anna May Wong was, gosh, that she I didn't realize until I read your book that she was started when there weren't even talkies, right? I mean, it was
Yeah, she
silent.
started in the silent era. Yeah, so I mean, she started doing extra work when she was 14 as a teenager. So some of the first film she was in as an extra, though uncredited, and I don't think you see her face, um, was the Red Lantern in 1919. So yeah, so for the first 10 years of her career really were silent films.
Wow. Yeah, because there's one chapter, it stuck out in my mind about when she went to do that play in England, I believe it
Mhm.
was. And
Yeah, the
they
Blood
were like,
Child.
yeah, they were saying like her voice was too strident, too American, right? And I don't know if I haven't got to the part after where if in America they think, but in Britain they were like, she doesn't sound Chinese or something to that effect, right?
Right. Right. Well, because they didn't know what her voice sounded like. And, many people, when they saw her in films, they assumed that she was from China,
Right.
right? She was a foreigner. And so I think it was really shocking to hear her speak not only fluent English, but in an American accent. And, I don't know what they were expecting. Like, what should a Chinese person sound like when they're speaking English, right? Like, I don't know what the answer to that is. But yeah, it was a lot of criticism that she received. And then what she did in response to that was she took British elocution lessons.
Mm-hmm.
So when she goes back to the US after that and does her first speaking roles, she has a somewhat British tinged accent. So we actually don't really know what her accent sounded like before that because she basically kept it. I mean, there's certainly it wasn't so British towards the end of her career, but I still wonder, like, what did that, her terrible American accent sound like?
I guess we'll never know. I mean, something might pop up eventually. Um, yeah, so she goes back to America, and but she seemed to have a bit of success in Europe, at least according to what I read in your book. Like they were a little bit more accepting of her, and she felt like she was getting a new lease on her career.
Mhm.
She got the bad reviews, and then she went back to America. And then what happened after that when she left England? I can't remember because I haven't got to that part yet, actually.
Yeah. So, I mean, she was incredibly successful in Europe, just like, Paul Robeson and Josephine Baker, Black American entertainers who had to go to Europe to be acknowledged and given kind of the space to actually do their art. So she was incredibly successful there. And because of that, Hollywood started to notice like, oh, maybe we made a mistake in not giving her leading roles because that was the real issue. They wouldn't put her in leading roles because they said, well, if you play opposite a white male lead, then that's an interracial relationship and that's not okay, that's not kosher, and you could never have a happy ending. So she always had to die in these films. So that's why she um, went to Europe, and so Europe she's very successful. So what happens is she comes back, she spends 3 years in Europe, and then she comes back to the US. She sails back to New York, and she was meant to just head straight back to Los Angeles. But as she's like disembarking from the boat, this producer comes up to her and says, will you please be in this play called On the Spot, which had previously opened in London and had a part for there. It's about a Chicago gangster and his girlfriend is Chinese. So they wanted her to play that role. So
Right.
she's basically like, okay, I'll do the role. And then she has 2 weeks to rehearse and then it opens on Broadway. And it was incredibly successful. So she's opens this Broadway play. I think it ran for basically 5 months. And then she ends up traveling it to many different cities, eventually brings it to Los Angeles, San Francisco. But so when she comes back to LA, Paramount offers her a two film contract. So she's
Mhm.
got a new deal. So basically, her going to Europe was a really important move in her career. It allows her to come back to Hollywood in this very triumphant way. And so they give her a starring vehicle. Unfortunately, it's a Fu Manchu film, so it's not really something you can take seriously. It's called Daughter of the Dragon, and
Right.
she's playing the evil daughter of Fu Manchu, and I mean, it's interesting too because Warner Oland is in it. He's playing the Fu Manchu, and then you have Setsu Hayakawa, the Japanese actor they've brought back to Hollywood to play the kind of good detective who's also kind of her love interest. But yeah, it's an interesting film to watch, but it's like the script is really terrible. The only thing that I really enjoy about it is that she has these beautiful costumes, like that are designed by Travis Banton, who was like this legendary costumer. And there's so many different costumes she wears in it. So they really spared no expense in terms of creating the film. But of course, it was a flop. It wasn't anything that people really enjoyed at the box office. So that kind of didn't help. It didn't really help her career in that sense. And then after that film, she does Shanghai Express with Marlene Dietrich and Joseph von Sternberg.
Oh, right. Yeah, you were talking about that at the CAM event and how there was like a rumor that her and Marlena Dietrich were lovers or something, but you kind of dispelled that.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's with someone like Marlena Dietrich, it's very easy to start rumors because Marlena was bisexual and she had, so many affairs.
Right.
I mean, it's almost so hard to keep track of them, but so I think it's easy. I can see why people would extrapolate from that, but when you actually look at, well, the evidence, because there is no evidence, and they weren't even really. I mean, that's the thing too, is that people often like to say, "Oh, they were close friends." They really weren't close friends. They did not.
They didn't
They
hang out.
didn't they did not hang out outside of the studio. Yes, on set when they worked together or were brushing, shoulders at Paramount, yes, they were friendly. But in a sense, they were also kind of professional rivals. I mean, Shanghai Express, even though it's a Marlena Dietrich vehicle, I mean, Anna May Wong probably gives her strongest performance in a Hollywood film in that film. And
Mhm.
so they're if you are looking at it from a professional standpoint, if I were Marlena Dietrich, I'd be a little concerned. And of
Mhm.
course, what had happened in the span of 2 years was things that had their positions had kind of reversed because when they first met in Germany, Marlena Dietrich was not famous
Mhm.
nationally. She was known in Berlin, but she wasn't famous anywhere else. So Anna May Wong was actually the more famous person. But then, a year and a half later, she's been brought to Hollywood by Joseph von Sternberg, given the star treatment. They've rolled out the red carpet for her. They've made her into this huge star overnight because of the studio's power and desire to do that. And so now she's the lead and Anime Wong's the supporting roles too. So I'm sure that didn't totally sit well with Anime. Like she understood that the studio was willing to do it for someone like Marlena, but they never would do that for her. You know what I mean? Like
Mhm.
they weren't willing to put all of their power behind her. So there's I think when you really understand the dynamics of what's going on behind the scenes, it becomes harder and harder to see how they would be lovers. And then, the ultimate thing that settled it for me was I asked Marlena's daughter, who was on set with the two women. She was like a 6-year old, very observant. She wrote like 1,000-page memoir about her mother's life, including all of her affairs.
All right.
Um, so I asked her, I was like, well, a lot of people say that your mother and Anna May might have had an affair. What do you think about that? And she said, absolutely not. She was like, they were friends, like as young women are, like they got along in many different ways, but they were not lovers. And I was like, okay, that's what I thought.
So you got that cleared from the horse's mouth, as they say,
Yeah.
sort of. So yeah, and then okay, so fast forward, she started to make she started her own production company, right? Anime Wong.
Well, that was earlier in her career, and unfortunately, it didn't go anywhere. What happened? This was like around 1925, 1924. So it's right after she gets her big breakout role in The Thief of Baghdad with Douglas Fairbanks, and everyone's like hot to have her in their films. And so some kind of supposed businessman comes to her and says, "I'll help you open your own production company," which was uh, something that a lot of well-known actresses did then, so that they could produce their own starring vehicles. So this man supposedly did this with her. They opened like Anime Wong Productions, but then it turns out he's just using it to rack up debts in her name. So yeah, so it actually never led to any productions, and she had to sue him and get like the whole thing settled. And supposedly for a year, she couldn't actually make any other films because of the contract she had signed with him said that she would be exclusively doing films for this production company that didn't exist. So yeah, so it's actually an example of how and this is not something that just happened to anime. There's another Filipino American actress who that happened to as well, where they said, "Oh, we're gonna start a production company for you," and like it didn't lead to anything. So it kind of shows you how people preyed on vulnerable people who might not have had like the financial know-how. So yeah, so it was an interesting little episode in her career.
Oh, I didn't realize that. I thought it happened later in her career because she was trying to do something before she died, trying to develop some projects. So I guess I thought the timing was, different. Um, and it's so sad to me. She died kind of young.
She's only 56. She had a number of health ailments by that age, but um I guess it's like I always like to look at the glass half full, because if you consider how much she did in her short lifetime, it's quite a lot. Because she was, since she was 14, was when she started in the film. She'd been working in films and television for, essentially 40 years,
Mhm.
out of 56 years, or actually more than 40 years out of 56 years. Um, but yes, I mean, if you look at a lot of her peers, they also didn't fare very well either because everyone was drinking and
And back,
smoking.
back in those days, like 56 was like 76, you know?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, some of her peers didn't even make it to their 50s. So, that was kind of, I guess, the flip side of being in Hollywood.
And it's so sad too because I know she was going to be in Flower Drum Song, I believe. She was going to have a part.
Yes.
I was watching this clip of Nancy Kwan and she was saying that they were interviewing about Asian representation and she seemed to have a very, it hasn't been that hard for me, blah, blah, blah. But she said Anna May Wong's time was a lot different and I feel bad because she was going to be in her movie, but then I think she died like right before or something, you know.
Yeah, she died about like a week or two before rehearsals were supposed to start. So, and she was going to play Madame Liang, which is one of the elders in the film. So, because originally Flower Drum Song was supposed to be the first Hollywood production to have an all Asian principal cast.
Mhm.
And because she died, they replaced her with the woman who had played the role on Broadway. A disappointment in the fact that she died before she could be in that film.
I know. I mean, it was such a huge hit too. That would have
Yeah.
been a great little feather in her cap. The other thing that I thought was interesting, and I don't know if it was well, you talked a little bit about it at Cam, how she wasn't married and she didn't have kids, and it was kind of by choice, but in a way, I mean, it was by choice, I believe, but also she was kind of ahead of her time in that sense, living independently and not getting married or having kids. Do you think was she sad about that, or did she enjoy being single? I don't know.
I've come to the point of view that she really embraced her independence and wanted to be single. I mean, because you, I've read in so many interviews that and because that was just a constant question, right? Are you getting married? Who are you going to
Mhm,
marry? Yeah.
mhm.
So, like, are you going to marry a white man? Are you going to marry an Asian man? Like, so that was like a kind of a regular annoyance of
Right.
her celebrity.
So
And then
my dad doesn't even ask me that often.
Yeah. So the interesting thing is that she kind of gives different answers throughout the years,
Mhm.
which to me, I think she's just finding an excuse to tell people, like, I'm not getting married, like she just didn't want to get married. So every time she has a different answer for it. And in the beginning, I mean, of course, it is true that she was caught in this era when, she couldn't really legally she couldn't marry a white man. I mean, she could have gone to another country and married them, but there would have been some controversy to that, right? Because she's in the public eye, so people would be very aware of the fact that she'd be married to very in an interracial marriage. It would have been difficult for her to marry a Chinese man. I mean, I think she herself didn't want to because she saw the way her dad kind of was in charge of everything in their household and her mom waited on him and she didn't like that. She didn't want to be in a traditional marriage like that either. So there is that, but she really was married to her art. And which she says sometimes she had turned that into a joke in many of the interviews that she gave, but it really was true. She lived to make her art, to be in films, to be in television. And she didn't really want anything to stop her from doing that. And she also loved the lifestyle of traveling, of having lovers in different places. I mean, there were a number of people who proposed marriage to her, and she said no. She also gives another reason, and of course, this always makes me cringe a little bit. But she said,
Oh,
I that
say.
she didn't want to get married to a white man because she didn't want to have half-breed children,
Right.
and which is, you know, I think there are ways to understand what she's trying to get at, and I think she herself felt like she was a half caste she sang that song by Noel Coward, Half Caste Woman. It was a song she sang as part of her cabaret act of about being caught between these two worlds, never Chinese enough, never American enough. And so I think she didn't really want that same fate for her children if she were to have them. So there's all of those things. that are wrapped up into it. And then, she was also just very close to her family. So she already had a family unit. So in that sense, I don't think she felt the need to recreate a new family for herself when she had so many people that she loved and lived with.
Right. I understand that. My mom came from like 11 kids, so she had only like one with, me. I'm an only child. So, because I think she was like, I'm not, when you sometimes you grow up like with that many kids, right?
Right, right.
Like, I don't want to have that many kids. But anyway, yeah, but that I thought that was interesting. She was ahead of her time in that sense, to me, that she lived independently and never really sought to get married. So. Um, so what I wanted to ask you was, how's the response been from your book? I mean, I actually haven't read any review. Well, I've read your reviews on your book, but I mean, in general, I've been getting good response.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, it's been a great response. I hear from people at some events in person, and then from sometimes people email me or leave messages other places. I feel like the fans. I'm in a number of like Anna May Wong fan groups. So the response from fans has been really positive, which has been actually means a lot to me because I think we're all. I mean, I wrote this as a fan of her, right? And I wanted to. I mean, I wrote it in a way to where you could kind of live vicariously through her and experience her life and be there for the ups and the downs. And so the fact that it resonates with other fans just it means a lot to me. So I'm very pleased about that. And I'm hopeful that some people are learning some things about her that they didn't know, and I'm correcting some misperceptions that had been put out there in the past. So
Yeah,
yeah.
and I know there's a movie coming out about Anna May Wong with Gemma Chan, I think is playing her.
Yes. Yes.
But what about your book, turning it into a screenplay?
Yeah. Since there's already a biopic in the works, I definitely wouldn't want to compete with that. The screenplay is being written by David Henry Hwang, who's like the
Yeah,
preeminent American playwright. So there's, I wouldn't, I'm not going to throw my hat into that ring. Also, I think it's incredibly difficult to boil somebody's life down into like 2 or 3 hours.
right.
I do not envy that task, but I would actually love to like adapt it into like a series where you
Mm.
could go deeper
Mhm.
into different parts of her life, and then maybe each season is like a different era in her career. I don't know. So that's something that I'd really love to do, because then you can also maybe fictionalize some things that
Sure.
I just don't have, that we just don't have research or proof of, but you could explore some other things and some of the other people in her world
Mm.
uh, more fully. So yeah, I'd love to adapt it for like a television series.
Yeah, that's a great idea, 'cause especially since, in streaming, there's so many more opportunities that maybe could
Mm,
be available
yeah.
for that. And yeah, they need content all the time. Proud of you that you're doing so many things to expose American people to the different aspects of Chinese American life, That seems to be your calling, right?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because sometimes you don't really like, if you had asked me what am I interested in 10 years ago, I don't know that I would have had an answer, but you realize it in doing things. You're like, oh, this interests me. I'm going to do something on it. And then you're like, oh, I guess that's a theme. Like, this is the theme. I'm always interested in like Chinese American, Asian American, mixed race stories, because that all relates to my own identity, I suppose. But it's something I think that it just doesn't get enough attention or understanding. But yeah, the interesting thing about that project as well was that I started to learn, and again, a lot of these things are connected to family history because, like Anna May Wong, learning about her is like a way of learning about my own history. And then in this Chinese restaurant project, I started asking questions about our family. Oh, did anyone ever work in a restaurant? And then it turned out that my great grandfather owned a restaurant in Los Angeles, Chinatown. But at the time, he was like too ill to work there. But my great aunt, who just passed at the age of 99, she used to work in this she used to almost do everything in this restaurant as like a 14-year-old. She had like a special driver's license. So she could drive around town to pick up like food and meat and all sorts of things. And
The first Uber Eats.
yeah, yeah. And then she even showed me how she used to wait, how she could hold two different dishes in one hand. And so she told me all about this restaurant, and I was like, wow, like this this whole, this idea that you can come to America, make a living through Chinese restaurants is like been going on for a very long time, and it's enabled so many families to get like a foothold here. And so that was also a very meaningful part of that project, to realize, oh, I am the beneficiary of this, like, really type of this immigrant story, right? Even though it's like several generations later. um, but it's I think nice to be able to honor that.
Yeah, that's fascinating. Your mom must be so proud.
I mean, she is. I mean, she is, and she's also like, yeah, she's like, I never knew any of these
Never
things.
knew you were so interested in our history. I know it's fascinating. I love history anyway, but I'm fascinated with the Asian culture, because I am half Asian. So, but like, my first book that I ever read was about the Song sisters. Did you ever read the story of?
I haven't read that book, but yeah, that sounds really interesting.
So fascinating. Chiang Kai-shek's wife, sister was married to, I think it was Sun. It's been a long time since it was
Yeah,
Sun.
Sun Yat-sen. Yeah, they're both married to these very important
Yeah,
people.
and Madame Chiang Kai-shek, my mom used to always say, "Oh, everybody idolized her like she was Jackie O." She was Jackie O of Taiwan, right?
Yeah.
The 60s were very glamorous. That's when the Chinese women, especially Chinese culture, was very. It was kind of this new burgeoning time period where,
Yes.
kind of like the Nancy Kwan days and all that. But
Mhm.
it's only because of, and unfortunately Anna May Wong had to come up. She was one of the pioneers of that whole thing when she had to do it alone because there wasn't really anybody else doing it.
Huh. Yeah, very true. It was really her, just her on her own.
Yeah, good for her. She's like a strong, strong woman. Anyway, I want to say thank you for coming on. And how can people? I know you have a website. It's is it your name, Katie
Yeah,
Gee's?
so I have a website that's under my name, katiegsalisbury.com, but you can also, if you're interested, people are interested in the book and Anna May Wong, they can visit notyourchinadoll.com. So I have those two different websites. I also write a monthly newsletter that is about Anna May Wong, but sometimes about just Asian American representation in general. It's called Half Caste Woman, and it's on Substack. And then I also do have an Instagram that's dedicated to Anna May Wong, called Anna May Wong Book.
I
So
think
yeah,
I'm subscribing to one of those. I think I'm subscribing to one of those, the newsletter.
great.
um, it's just funny. I just mispronounced your name. I said Katie Gee Salisbury, but it's Katie G, right?
G, yeah, G.
So is G? Is that your family, your mom's name? Last
Yeah,
name?
it's my mom's name. So it's like a Cantonese name. It's the same character for Chu,
Okay.
but in Cantonese, it's like sounds like G.
Okay, so I just learned something because I was thinking it was Katie Yee for some reason. I wanted to ask you, have you read that book, Crying in H Mart? Um,
I haven't read it yet. I just got a copy of it though, because it's been on my list for a very long time.
so good. She's Korean American. Her dad was European or white or something, but she's half Korean, and it's a really, really good book. And she's a musician as well, so it's a
Yeah.
very fascinating story. So you two inspired me. I'm going to start writing more. Anyway, well, so nice having you on, and I will keep you posted about everything. And like I said, I'm going to incorporate a lot of the Chinese American Museum stuff in this because I want to get I want to get some exposure on the museum, right?
Yeah, amazing. Well, thank you so much for having me. It was really fun to chat with you.
You're welcome, and I'll probably see you at another event, I'm sure.
That would be great.
All right, take care. I'll see you
Okay,
later.
thank you.
Bye.
Bye.